The needle skipped, a familiar scratch against the shellac of a Benny Goodman record. 1938. Outside, the wind howled a mournful dirge around KLOV, perched precariously on the mountainside. Evelyn adjusted her headphones, the static, a constant companion in this small, wood-paneled studio. Her father, Thomas, coughed weakly from his room, a sound swallowed by the rising storm. Snow hammered against the windows, blurring the already fading light. Earlier, Jedediah from the logging camp called, his voice crackling with static, reporting that the old logging road had given way. Landslide. No way in or out now. Just her ailing father, and the increasingly violent symphony of the storm. She flipped a switch, cutting the music. KLOV, Astoria, she announced, her voice echoing in the empty studio. Concluding broadcast for this evening. The storm seemed to answer with a ferocious gust, rattling the antenna tower outside. An unsettling feeling settled in her stomach, a premonition as heavy as the leaden sky.
The emergency generator sputtered, casting long dancing shadows across the control panel. Evelyn shivered, pulling her wool cardigan tighter. Outside, the storm clawed at the station, a ravenous beast desperate to get in. She needed to check the auxiliary band. Thomas always said to listen close when the weather turned mean. Fumbling with the dial, she swept through the familiar hiss and crackle with the airwaves. Nothing, just the storm's white noise, amplified and malevolent. Then, a flicker, a whisper, barely audible beneath the static. She slowed the dial, her breath catching in her throat. It wasn't music, not any language she recognized. A garbled mess of sound, interwoven with rhythmic clicks and pulses like a telegraph gone mad. The hair on the back of her neck prickled. It was wrong, unnatural. She fiddled with the gain, trying to isolate the signal. But the storm fought back, each gust of wind bringing a fresh wave of static that threatened to drown out the strange transmission. The distorted voices seemed to rise and fall with the wind, a chorus of moans and guttural whispers, as if the storm itself was trying to speak. Amidst the chaos, she picked out snippets of what sounded like numbers? Coded messages, repeating in a maddening loop. A sense of dread washed over her, cold and paralyzing. This wasn't just a storm. This was something else. Panic clawed at her. She reached for the microphone, her fingers trembling. "Calling any station! Calling any station! This is KLOV Astoria. We're experiencing unusual interference. Requesting assistance." She paused, listening intently. Only the relentless roar of the storm answered. She tried again, her voice tighter this time. "Anyone! Please! Respond! We need help!" Silence. Utter, isolating silence, save for the unsettling transmission that seemed to be growing stronger with each passing moment, resonating with the fury of the wind outside. The coded messages were clearer now, sharper, mocking her. She was alone, utterly alone, and the storm, with its cryptic voices, was closing in.
The hum of the recording lathe was a small comfort, a counterpoint to the shrieking wind that buffeted the station. Evelyn carefully adjusted the needle, watching as the blank disc began to spin. Capturing this, whatever it was, felt crucial. Evidence, though to whom she'd present it, she didn't know. As the stylus bit into the acetate, the strange broadcast bled from the speakers, a cacophony of distorted voices and those unsettling, rhythmic pulses. Outside, a tree branch snapped, the sound like a gunshot in the oppressive silence between the gusts. She let the lathe run, the disc slowly filling with the unsettling sounds. When it was full, she carefully removed it, placing it in a protective sleeve. Now, to dissect it. She wheeled over the station's oscilloscope, its green eye pulsing expectantly. Connecting the recorder's output, she played back the transmission, watching as the waveforms dance across the screen. The garbled voices were almost impossible to decipher, a wall of noise. But the pulses were different, distinct, regular. She adjusted the filters, carefully cutting away the static and the wind noise. Slowly, painstakingly, she began to isolate the rhythmic pulses. They weren't random. They had a pattern, a sequence. Short bursts, long pauses, repeating in a complex but undeniably ordered way. It felt like language. A language she didn't understand, but language nonetheless. She jotted down the patterns on a notepad, her brow furrowed in concentration. Dots and dashes. Could it be Morse code? An archaic form of communication, but perhaps in this isolation not entirely impossible. The lights flickered again, the emergency generator groaning under the strain. Evelyn glanced nervously at the voltmeter. The needle was dipping dangerously low. She needed to conserve power. Just then, a coughing fit from her father's room broke her thought-prang. She rushed to his side. Thomas lay pale and frail beneath a mound of blankets, his breathing shallow and labored. "Papa, are you all right?" she asked, kneeling beside him. He opened his eyes, his gaze unfocused. "Evelyn, the storm!" he rasped, his voice weak. "It remembers." Then his eyes fluttered shut again. She racked her brain. What did he mean, it remembers? Was he feverish, delusional? Or was this another piece of the puzzle? She felt a wave of helplessness wash over her. He was all she had. She adjusted his blankets, trying to ignore the tremor in her hands. Back in the studio, the recorded disc lay on the table, a silent testament to the growing dread that was consuming her. Time was running out. She had to understand what the storm was saying.
Back in the studio, Evelyn stared at the notepad filled with her frantic scribbles of dots and dashes. Morse code, it had to be. The most logical explanation, however improbable. She grabbed a tattered Morse code chart from a dusty shelf. Thomas had used it in his early days as a telegraph operator. With trembling fingers, she began to translate. The rhythmic pulses she'd painstakingly isolated, now taking shape as letters, then words. The first few fragments were gibberish. Jumbled letters, nonsensical combinations. She almost gave up, dismissing it all as a cruel hoax, a product of the storm's maddening influence. But then a clearer sequence emerged. B-E-W-A-R-E. Beware. The word echoed in her mind, cold and sharp. She continued, her heart pounding against her ribs. T-H-E-O-L-D-O-N-E-C-O-M-E-S. The old one comes. She paused, her breath catching in her throat. Old one? What old one? More fragments followed, cryptic and disturbing. H-U-N-G-E-R-S-F-E-A-R-I-S-F-O-O-D-S-L-E-E-P-B-E-N-E-A-T-H. The words painted a terrifying picture, a vision of something ancient and malevolent, awakened by the storm, feeding on fear. The storm outside redoubled its assault, the wind howling like a banshee, the snow battering against the windows with renewed ferocity. The lights flickered again, plunging the studio into near darkness. Evelyn fumbled for a kerosene lamp, its warm glow casting grotesque shadows on the walls. She forced herself to continue translating, her mind racing, trying to make sense of the fragmented warnings. C-H-A-O-S-I-S-K-E-Y. Chaos is key?
What did that even mean? The last legible sequence sent a shiver down her spine. DONOTLISTEN. Do not listen. Evelyn ripped off her headphones as if the very act could sever the connection to the unsettling broadcast. She clutched the notepad to her chest, the translated fragments swirling in her mind, a vortex of dread and confusion. It had to be a prank, a twisted joke perpetrated by some deranged individual with access to a powerful transmitter. That was the only logical explanation. But the chilling precision of the coded messages, the way they resonated with the growing intensity of the storm, the look in her father's eyes, it all felt too real, too sinister to be dismissed so easily. The wind howled again, louder this time, as if echoing the warning, "Do not listen." But she knew, with a growing certainty, that she couldn't ignore it. Whatever the storm was carrying, whatever the old one was, it was coming, and she was the only one who knew.
Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the station, every gust of wind that rattled the windows sent jolts of adrenaline through Evelyn's system. The translated phrases clawed at her mind. Beware, the old one comes. Fear is food. Dawn was still hours away, but the kerosene lamp cast enough light for her purpose. She pulled down a heavy, leather-bound volume from the highest shelf, a collection of local histories and folklore her father had amassed over the years. Dust motes danced in the lamplight as she flipped through the brittle pages, her fingers tracing faded ink. She sought answers, a lifeline in the rising tide of fear. The names of local families blurred. The Carters, the Sullivans, the McCoys, their histories intertwined with the rugged landscape. Then she found it, a chapter dedicated to the legends of the indigenous tribes who had once called these mountains home, tales of powerful spirits, both benevolent and malevolent, who dwelled in the forests and rode the storms. She scanned the text, her eyes darting across the page, searching for a connection. An image, a crude woodcut depicting a monstrous figure with antlers and glowing eyes, caught her attention. Beneath it, a description of the Winter Walker, an entity said to appear during the harshest winters, bringing with it blizzards and misfortune. The legend spoke of its insatiable hunger, its ability to feed on fear and despair, growing stronger with each terrified thought. Evelyn shivered, the description eerily familiar. She read on, her heart pounding in her chest. The tribes believed that the Winter Walker could be appeased through rituals, offerings of warmth and light, and the recitation of ancient chants. These rituals were meant to soothe the entity, to lull it back into its slumber beneath the frozen earth. Failure to appease it, the legend warned, would result in unimaginable chaos and destruction. She read a transcribed chant, a series of guttural sounds and rhythmic phrases that resonated with a primal power. Suddenly, the pieces clicked into place. Chaos is key. Could it be referring to the storm itself, a chaotic event that allowed the entity to manifest? The coded messages, the rituals, the warnings, they were all connected, fragments of a forgotten knowledge, a desperate attempt to contain the uncontainables. The phrase, "sleeping beneath," caught her eye, in relation to some underground caverns near the mountain, and the cavern's relation to the tribal rituals. She remembered her father's words, slurred and feverish. "It remembers." Had he known something all along? Had he been trying to protect her from this ancient evil? A wave of nausea washed over her. She slammed the book shut, the sound echoing in the small studio. The kerosene lamp flickered, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. She stared at the coded messages again, now imbued with a terrifying new meaning. What seemed like random gibberish now felt like a desperate plea, a warning from beyond the veil. The storm howled outside, a hungry, expectant roar. The entity was coming, and she, armed with nothing but a radio station and a handful of forgotten legends, was the only thing standing in her way.
The wind became a tangible force, slamming against KLOV with the fury of a battering ram. The entire structure shuddered, the wooden beams groaning under the strain. Evelyn gripped the edge of the control panel, trying to steady herself as the storm seemed intent on tearing the station from its moorings. She had to try again, had to get through to someone, anyone. She flipped the transmitter switch, the tubes warming with a faint hum. Calling any station, calling any station. This is KLOV Astoria. Emergency situation. Repeat, emergency situation. Her voice trembled, betraying the fear that gnawed at her insides. We're experiencing extreme weather conditions and unexplained phenomena. I repeat, unexplained phenomena. Request immediate assistance. Static. A wall of impenetrable static. She adjusted the frequency, desperately scanning the airwaves. Nothing. Only the relentless roar of the storm, a mocking echo of her pleas. She was trapped, isolated in a bubble of wind and snow, her voice lost in the maelstrom. She slammed her fist on the console in frustration, the metal vibrating beneath her hand. Futile. It was all futile. No one could hear her. No one knew what was coming. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her, suffocating her. She glanced at the doorway to her father's room, her heart aching with a mixture of fear and love. He was all she had left, and she couldn't even protect him. A sudden flicker in the corner of her eye made her jump. She spun around, her heart racing. Nothing. Just shadows, dancing in the flickering lamplight. But then she saw it again, a fleeting glimpse of something tall and gaunt, standing just beyond the edge of the light. Antlers, impossibly large and gnarled, scraping against the low ceiling. Glowing eyes, burning with an unholy light, fixed on her. She gasped, stumbling backward, her breath catching in her throat. The Winter Walker. It was here. But then it was gone, vanished as quickly as it had appeared. She blinked, her eyes straining in the dim light. Had she imagined it? Was the storm finally breaking her mind, conjuring up figments of ancient legends? She shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts. It had felt so real, so terrifyingly present, and yet there was nothing there, only shadows and the relentless howl of the wind. But the feeling lingered, a cold, clammy dread that settled deep in her bones. She wasn't alone. She knew it, with a certainty that transcended logic. It was here, in the storm, watching her. Waiting.
Evelyn's hands flew across the control panel, a frantic dance of desperation and resolve. A counter-broadcast. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was all she had. Using what she understood of radio frequency manipulation, gleaned from years of tinkering with the station's equipment, she began to formulate a plan. The coded messages had contained rhythmic pulses, a distinct energy signature. If she could generate a signal that mimicked and then disrupted that pattern, perhaps she could weaken the entity's hold on the storm, or at least buy herself some time. She needed to overload the original signal and find frequencies to counteract its effects. She bypassed the normal broadcast bands, rerouting the transmitter's power to a rarely used experimental frequency. Thomas had always warned her against it, claiming it was unstable and prone to causing interference, but now instability was precisely what she needed. She adjusted the modulation, tweaking the wave patterns, carefully watching the oscilloscope as the green lines pulsed erratically.
She needed to create dissonance, to generate a chaotic signal that would act as a sonic repellent. Using the original rhythmic pulses she'd recorded, she added layers of white noise, static bursts, and inverted frequencies, crafting a jarring, unsettling cacophony. She prayed that her theory of sonic mitigation would work. She took a deep breath and flipped the switch, unleashing the counter-broadcast into the storm-ravaged airwaves. The station groaned under the strain, the emergency generator sputtering violently. Outside, the wind seemed to intensify, howling with a renewed ferocity, as if the entity sensed her defiance. The snow pounded against the windows, blurring her vision. She braced herself, waiting for a reaction, any sign that her efforts were having an effect. At first, nothing, only the relentless roar of the storm and the unsettling hum of the transmitter. Then, a tremor. A subtle vibration that ran through the floorboards, up her legs, and into her very bones. The lights flickered violently, threatening to plunge the station into darkness. She fumbled for the kerosene lamp, her hands shaking uncontrollably. She managed to light it, the warm glow casting eerie shadows on the walls. The shriek subsided, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. She stumbled toward the transmitter, desperate to shut it down. As she reached for the switch, a voice, faint but distinct, echoed from her father's room. Nilathapotha, Azathoth. The words were slurred, almost unintelligible, but they sent a shiver down her spine. They were the same guttural sounds, the same rhythmic inflections she'd heard in the intercepted broadcast. She rushed to her father's side, her heart pounding in her chest. Thomas lay in his bed, his eyes closed, his face pale and gaunt. But his lips moved, forming the strange, alien syllables. Tulgoth, Iakak, Shub-Nigrath. The words seemed to claw their way out of his throat, a horrifying litany of forgotten names. He was no longer her father. He was a vessel, a conduit for the entity that was raging outside. Fear, cold and paralyzing, gripped Evelyn's heart. It was in here with them now.
Evelyn tore wires from a defunct microphone, sparks flying as she spliced them directly into the transmitter's core. Time was a serpent, coiling tighter with each passing moment. The entity's broadcast, now a shrieking cacophony, threatened to shatter the fragile glass of her sanity. Knotted within those shrieks were the pulses, the rhythmic heartbeats of its power. She needed to sever that connection, disrupt its flow. Her father's chanting, a guttural intrusion into the studio, spurred her on. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she calibrated the frequency modulator, her fingers dancing across the dials. The air crackled with static electricity, raising the hairs on her arms. She was pushing the equipment far beyond its intended limits, channeling a raw, untamed energy into the makeshift antenna. The old transmitter, a relic from a bygone era, hummed with increasing intensity, threatening to explode. She glanced nervously at the voltmeter, the needle quivering in the red zone. She had to focus. Recalling the oscilloscope's data, she sought the precise harmonic frequency needed to counteract the entity's signal. Each pulse from the broadcast was a hammer blow against her resolve. She added several layers of disruptive frequencies. Each wave seemed to fight against her will as she tweaked knobs and dials. The entity's frantic broadcast intensified, morphing into a desperate, pleading wail. It was aware, acutely aware of her interference. The thought sent a jolt of fear through her, but she pressed on, fueled by adrenaline and a fierce determination to protect her father, to protect herself. Suddenly, The studio plunged into near darkness as a surge overloaded the power circuit. The transmitter sputtered, the lights dimmed, and a plume of smoke billowed from the back panel. She coughed, waving away the acrid fumes. She fought to restore power to the transmitter, hoping it wasn't too late. She reset the breaker and tried to bring it back up slowly and carefully. She threw the master switch with as much reverence and courage as she could manage. A low hum filled the space as power cycled back to the transmitter. The needle on the voltmeter bounced dangerously close to red before settling on a more sustainable measure. The air in the studio smelled like ozone and something else, something that almost smelled like a wild animal. The broadcast screamed once more, an unearthly sound full of fury and promise. A final calibration, a deep breath. She had to believe this would work. She had to believe. Then she unleashed the counter-broadcast.
Evelyn unleashed the counter-broadcast. The station bucked like a wild thing, every wire singing a strained, high-pitched note. Lights flickered violently, strobing across the control panel, each pulse mirroring the frantic beat of her heart. The transmitter groaned under the strain, a metal leviathan pushed to its breaking point. A surge of raw, untamed energy washed over the room, tingling against her skin, raising the hair on the back of her neck. The air crackled with static, filling her nostrils with the sharp scent of ozone. It was working, but at what cost? The entity's broadcast retaliated with a vengeance. It intensified, a deafening crescendo of shrieks and guttural chanting that seemed to vibrate the very bones in her skull. The speaker shrieked, spitting out a torrent of noise that threatened to overwhelm her senses. She felt a sharp, piercing pain lance through her head, as if the entity was trying to claw its way into her mind to seize control of her thoughts. Images flashed behind her eyelids, grotesque visions of gnarled antlers, glowing eyes, and a landscape ravaged by endless winter. She stumbled backward, clutching her head, her vision blurring. The entity was fighting back, using its power to break her will, to shatter her resolve. But she couldn't give in. Not now. Not ever. She took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing herself to focus. She closed her eyes, picturing her father, his frail face etched with worry, his voice a comforting whisper in the darkness. She thought of the town below, the people who were oblivious to the danger that threatened them. She had to protect them. She had to stop it. She opened her eyes, her gaze hardening with determination. She wouldn't let it win. She wouldn't let it inside. Focusing all her will, she channeled her energy into maintaining the counter signal. She visualized the waveform patterns on the oscilloscope, the chaotic mess of lines that represented her defiance. She focused on the rhythmic pulses, the heartbeats of the entity's power, and imagined her signal disrupting them, shattering them, turning them into harmless noise. The battle for control of the airwaves had begun. A silent, invisible war waged in the heart of the storm, a desperate struggle between a lone woman and an ancient, malevolent force. The station trembled, the lights flickered, and the air crackled with energy. Evelyn stood her ground, her eyes blazing with defiance, her will a shield against the darkness. The fate of KLOV, perhaps the fate of the world, hung in the balance.
The storm roared, a beast unleashed. Hurricane-force winds hammered KLOV, each gust a physical blow. Torrents of rain lashed against the windows, blurring the outside world into an indistinguishable swirl of white. The old station groaned and creaked, every timber protesting under the unimaginable strain. Evelyn fought to maintain her balance, her feet slipping on the slick wooden floor. The counter-broadcast, a desperate plea against the encroaching darkness, wailed from the speakers, a discordant symphony of static and disrupted frequencies.
But the entity was fighting back. Its influence grew stronger, a psychic assault that threatened to overwhelm her. Visions flickered in her mind, disjointed and terrifying. She saw ancient landscapes, barren and desolate, shrouded in perpetual twilight. She saw figures cloaked in shadow, their faces obscured by grotesque masks, performing strange rituals under a blood-red moon. She saw the entity, not as a storm, but as a being of immense power, a cosmic horror that transcended human comprehension. Glimpses of the past assaulted her. A Roman legion, lost in a blizzard in the Alps, their cries swallowed by the wind. A Viking longship tossed and broken on a storm-lashed sea, its crew succumbing to madness. A Puritan settlement ravaged by disease and paranoia, their prayers unanswered. Each vision an echo of the entity's passage, a testament to its enduring power, its ancient origins. This was not just a local threat, not just a storm confined to the Oregonian mountains. This was something far greater, something that had plagued humanity for centuries, a cosmic parasite feeding on fear and despair. A surge of cold dread washed over her, threatening to drown her in despair. She understood now, with a chilling certainty, that she was facing something beyond her comprehension, an entity that had existed long before humanity, and would likely continue to exist long after humans. The legends, the rituals, the warnings, they were not just the superstitions of ignorant tribes. They were echoes of a desperate struggle, a centuries-long battle against a force that could not be defeated, only contained. The wind howled, a mournful dirge that seemed to carry the weight of ages. She saw a flash of light outside the window, followed by a deafening crack of thunder that shook the entire station. The lights flickered again, plunging the studio into near darkness. The entity's voice filled her mind, a chorus of whispers and moans that spoke of power and dominion, of endless hunger and insatiable desire. It promised her oblivion, a release from the terror, a surrender to its will. She could feel its presence, a cold, suffocating pressure that threatened to crush her. But even as fear threatened to consume her, a flicker of defiance ignited within her. She was Evelyn, daughter of Thomas, guardian of KLOV. She would not surrender. She would not break. She would fight, even if it meant facing the darkness alone. Clenching her fists, she threw back her head and screamed, a primal cry of defiance that echoed into the storm. The counter-broadcast wailed, a desperate plea against the encroaching darkness, and the battle continued.
The entity's scream faltered, dissolving into a fractured echo within the storm. Like a wounded beast, its power visibly waned. The cacophony of voices that moments before had threatened to tear her mind apart now faded into a distant, garbled murmur. The agonizing pain that had gripped her head loosened its hold, replaced by a throbbing ache. The grotesque visions, once so vivid and terrifying, flickered and dissolved, like phantoms banished by the rising sun. The old one was weakening. Outside, an almost imperceptible shift occurred. The wind, still ferocious, seemed to lose some of its malevolent focus. The driving rain eased slightly, becoming a heavy, persistent downpour. The station, though still groaning under the strain, seemed to breathe a collective relief. Her counter-broadcast, though still strained, found a more stable cadence. Her desperate gamble was working. Evelyn, though exhausted and battered, felt a surge of adrenaline. She knew better than to celebrate. This was not a victory, merely a reprieve. The entity, though weakened, was far from defeated. It was retreating, gathering its strength, biding its time. She could feel it, lurking just beyond the veil of reality, a malevolent presence waiting for an opportunity to strike again. She glanced towards the doorway of her father's room, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. What was happening to him? Was he still a vessel, still a conduit for the entity's power? She had to know. She edged towards the doorway, her hand trembling as she reached for the knob. The chanting had stopped, leaving an unnerving silence in its wake. She pushed the door open, peering into the dimly lit room. Thomas lay still in his bed, his face pale and drawn. He appeared to be sleeping, his breathing shallow and labored. But something was different. Something was missing. The air in the room felt cleaner. The oppressive weight, the lingering presence of the entity was gone. She approached the bed cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. She reached out, gently touching his forehead. His skin was cold and clammy. She leaned closer, listening for his breath. It was faint, but steady. He was alive. Relief washed over her, so potent that it almost brought her to her knees. But even as she rejoiced, a chilling realization dawned on her. The entity was gone. But where had it gone? Had it simply retreated? Or had it transferred? Had it found a new vessel, a new conduit for its power? A gust of wind rattled the windows, a mournful sigh that seemed to echo the entity's retreat. Evelyn shivered, a premonition of dread settling deep in her bones. This was not over. Not by a long shot. The storm was still raging, and the old one, somewhere out there in the darkness, was gathering its strength for a final, devastating assault.
The storm's fury, though diminished, still clawed at KLOV like a wounded animal. The wind, now a moaning lament rather than a predatory howl, whistled through cracks in the station's walls, a chilling reminder of the battle just endured. Rain continued to fall, a relentless drumming against the roof, but the oppressive sense of malevolence, the suffocating presence that had filled the station only moments ago, had receded, leaving an almost eerie calm in its wake. Evelyn stumbled back into the studio, her legs heavy, her mind reeling. The counter-broadcast, still humming from the speakers, had bought them time, a sliver of peace in the heart of the tempest. But how much time? She wiped a grimy hand across her forehead, smearing dirt and sweat across her skin. The studio was a wreck. Wires dangled from the control panel, sparks occasionally spitting from exposed connections. Broken glass littered the floor, a testament to the force of the storm. The air reeked of ozone and burnt electronics. But in the midst of the chaos, the transmitter hummed, battered but unbroken, a testament to her desperate ingenuity. KLOV, against all odds, was still broadcasting. Driven by a mixture of hope and dread, she turned back towards her father's room. She had to be sure, had to confirm that the entity was truly gone, that Thomas was safe, at least for now. She pushed open the door, her breath catching in her throat. The scene that greeted her was both a relief and a source of renewed unease. Thomas lay still in his bed, his face pale and gaunt, but his breathing was slow and regular. He looked peaceful, almost serene, a stark contrast to the tormented expression he had worn only moments ago. The chanting had ceased. The guttural litany of forgotten names no longer echoed in the room. He seemed to be resting, finally, free from the entity's influence. She approached the bed cautiously, her senses on high alert. She reached out, gently touching his hand. His skin was still cold, but there was a faint warmth beneath the surface. His pulse, though weak, was steady. He was alive. But how much of him was left? Had the entity left a mark, a lingering taint that would forever alter him? She sat beside him, watching his chest rise and fall with each labored breath. The storm raged outside, a constant reminder of the danger that still lurked. The counter-broadcast hummed from the studio, a fragile shield against the encroaching darkness. She knew that the reprieve was temporary. The entity was out there, somewhere in the storm, gathering its strength, plotting its return. She had to be ready. She had to be vigilant.
The battle was far from over. She reached for a tethered blanket, tucking it around her father's frail body. The weight of responsibility settled upon her shoulders, heavy and unyielding. She was alone, the last line of defense against an ancient evil, and the storm, though diminished, still held its breath, waiting for the opportune moment to strike again. She closed her eyes, whispering a silent prayer, a desperate plea for strength, for guidance, for a glimmer of hope in the encroaching darkness. The fate of KLOV, perhaps the fate of something far greater, rested in her hands. And the clock, she knew, was ticking.
As a sliver of dawn pierced the storm clouds, painting the ravaged landscape in shades of gray and bruised purple, Evelyn slumped before the microphone, exhaustion clinging to her like a shroud. The storm, though subdued, had left an indelible mark. Trees lay uprooted, their skeletal branches reaching towards the sky like accusing fingers. The station's antenna tower, miraculously still standing, leaned precariously, its guy wires straining under the weight of ice and snow. The world outside was a tableau of devastation, a stark reminder of the entity's power. She flipped the transmitter switch, the tubes warming with a faint, weary hum. Her voice, raspy and strained, echoed in the empty studio. "Calling any station, calling any station. This is KLOV, Astoria. Mayday, mayday. We have survived the storm, but require immediate assistance." She paused, listening intently for a response, any sign that her signal had broken through the atmospheric interference. Silence. Only the persistent hiss of static, a constant reminder of her isolation. She repeated the message, her voice growing stronger with each repetition, infusing it with a desperate plea for help. "We have encountered an anomaly, an entity within the storm. It is dangerous. We need assistance. Please respond." She described the coded messages, the guttural chanting, the terrifying visions, the entity's insatiable hunger. She laid bare the events of the past night, the desperate battle she had waged against an ancient evil. But how could she expect anyone to believe her? Her story sounded like madness, the ravings of a sleep-deprived woman driven to the brink by a violent storm. Who would believe in entities and coded messages and ancient rituals? They would dismiss her as a hysteric, a madwoman clinging to a radio transmitter in the middle of nowhere. But she had to try. She had to warn someone. Even if it was a futile gesture, she had to do everything in her power to prevent the entity from reaching beyond the confines of KLOV. Hours crawled by. The dawn deepened, revealing the full extent of the devastation. The snow had stopped falling, replaced by a cold, driving rain that washed away the grime and soot, but did little to alleviate the gloom. Evelyn remained at her post, a lone sentinel against the darkness, endlessly repeating her distress signal, clinging to the faint hope that someone, somewhere would hear her call. She checked on her father periodically, finding him still asleep, his breathing shallow but steady. The entity, it seemed, had withdrawn, leaving them in a state of uneasy limbo. She wondered if it was truly gone or had simply gone dormant like a viper in winter, waiting for the thaw before awakening. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm her, a flicker of static interrupted the monotony. A faint, distorted voice, barely audible beneath the hiss, began to coalesce. It was familiar, chillingly so. The same guttural intonations, the same rhythmic pulses she had translated from the coded messages? But now the voice spoke English, her native tongue, and it spoke directly to her. "Evelyn," the voice whispered, its tone a chilling mix of amusement and malice. "Evelyn." The sound of her own name spoken by the entity sent a shiver down her spine, a cold premonition of dread. It knew her name, it knew her, and it was still out there, lurking in the storm, waiting for its chance to return. She gripped the microphone tightly, her knuckles white. The battle was far from over. It had only just begun. The storm was within her now. The entity would linger. She was forever bound. Evelyn stared, transfixed at the console. The faint static, a constant companion, now laced with the chilling echo of her name. The entity's whisper, a seed of dread planted deep within her, bloomed with insidious tendrils. Was this its final act? A haunting reminder of its presence? Or the prelude to a more sinister return? She reached out, her fingers hovering over the dials, a primal urge to sever the connection, to silence the voice that now resided within the static within her. But she hesitated. To silence it completely might mean losing the ability to monitor it, to anticipate its next move. The line between victor and vanquished blurred, the question of success unanswered, hanging heavy in the air. Had she truly driven back the entity, or merely delayed the inevitable, forcing it into dormancy, a slumbering evil waiting for the opportune moment to reawaken? The storm, the weakened, still raged in her heart. The faint chant still echoed in her ears. She rose, her weary limbs protesting with each movement. The radio station, her sanctuary and her prison, stood as a testament to the battle, scarred and battered, but defiant. The final shot lingered, not on Evelyn, but on the radio antenna, a lone sentinel silhouetted against the stormy sky. A symbol of hope, a beacon in the darkness, a fragile line of communication to a world oblivious to the horrors that lurked in the shadows, but also a symbol of dread, a lightning rod for the entity's return, a conduit for its insidious whispers, a permanent reminder that the storm and the old one would never truly be silenced. The static persisted.